Well, hello. Thanks for joining us today. What is your name?
My name's Claudia Bevill.
Wonderful. And what were your years of service and your positions that you held at Braniff?
My position at Braniff was a flight hostess. It was such a privilege, and short term, 1965, 1966.
And some of the great years. That's great.
The best.
The best. What are you? Tell us what are some of your most. What do you remember most about Braniff?
The one thing I remember most about Braniff is that she was actually at the pinnacle of her success during that time. So I had the privilege of, I call it the transitionary period, because at the time we were, that I graduated from hostess school, we were wearing the Artist of Dallas charcoal suit and gloves and all that. And very soon thereafter, we transitioned into the Emilio Pucci raspberry suit with the periwinkle culottes and the boots and the coat and the hat with the little straps. And so that was a very memorable time.
Wow, lots of color.
Lots of color.
That's wonderful. Those, to be a flight hostess, obviously required a lot of training. Can you tell us more about the training that you went through to get into that role?
I can. First of all, I was a secretary at the time that I got the job, and I was recommended by one of the existing hostesses that I had met at a party. She suggested that I apply, which I did, and so I had to quit my job, and I had a car payment and an apartment rent to pay, but my dad graciously agreed to help me through that period financially so that I could go to hostess school. And at the time it was at the Executive Inn on Mockingbird, and it was a fairly new location for the hostess school at that time, so it was very, very nice. It was very well done. So it was 5 weeks, and it was early morning to late afternoon. We had a curfew of 10 o'clock. I had 2 roommates. We had like a dorm mom who made sure that we met our curfew and so forth. And if we had problems, we could go to her as well. So I do remember one of my roommates, I think she ended up becoming one of the supervisors later, much later. Her name was Uwita Hoggard. So that, I remember the training flights, particularly the first one that I went on was on a DC-6, which was a prop plane. And ironically, I took this job and had never been on an airplane before. So that was really a big thrill for me. And I was pretty much hooked once I took that flight.
That's amazing, especially to take the leap from a 9 to 5, Monday through Friday secretarial position into a complete new industry and a new role.
Well, that in itself, and then the fact that I was very sheltered as I was growing up. So I had never traveled at all. Our family was a happy, cohesive, loving family, but we didn't have a lot. So the only traveling we ever did was trip in the vehicle between Dallas and Wichita Falls to visit Mother's family. And so it was quite an adventure for me.
Well, that was a big change, because you were then shifting from, a family that, had very together and not traveling as much as far as like airplanes and things like that. So then being, a hostess and seeing an entire new world. As part of that world, did you see and service any celebrities during your period at Braniff?
I did. I can't remember which one, but for sure it was one of the soul singers. So I want to say Diana Ross or Aretha Franklin, but I do remember that, and I remember that she was traveling with a huge bass fiddle. So I don't know if her bass player was with her on this trip. I didn't inquire, but I remember that was a passenger seat, where this instrument was next to her.
They had it in the cabin?
In the cabin.
Wow.
It was in the cabin. I remember that. And then also John Glenn was on one of my flights, and at the time, I mean, he was very well known. I don't think he was into politics at that time. But he had already orbited the Earth, so that was like a really big deal. And we were on one of the BAC 111s, and it was a very, very torrential storm that we were in, and so we were bouncing around quite a bit. And the only consolation I had was to think, if he could get into a vehicle and orbit the Earth, surely we can get back to Dallas. So we were being tossed around, but and that was probably one of my frightening experiences.
Wow. I mean, that's a great story, because I'm sure he, from his experience, doing space flight, literally didn't care for a little turbulence. That was nothing to him.
Probably not. He probably didn't care, but I just found some comfort in thinking probably he could handle things. I don't know how that would work, but anyway.
So that was interesting to hear too. And then you said the DC-6 was your first flight personally as well, right? Earlier?
No,
Were you saying that?
no, that was my first training flight. But my very first flight as a hostess, when I was actually working and supposedly trained and supposedly knew what I was doing, was on a DC-3. Now that is 2 props. There were, I believe, if I remember correctly, 33 seats or something like that. And it was only one hostess to serve that small aircraft. And I was on reserve, so they called and said, you need to get to the airport. We need you to go to Denver. So I was all excited, got all ready, got to the airport on time. So what I knew is I was going to Denver. That's what I knew. And so it was a meal service, and I was so excited, and I was by myself. I didn't have someone telling me what to do. I was finally in charge. And so I enjoyed making the announcements. I think I put a little drama in there because I was just so thrilled. And then I served the meal, and the passengers were so nice, and they just seemed to love me, and I just offered them more coffee, more tea. And then suddenly the PA system came on, and the captain said, we're beginning our descent into Wichita Falls. Please make sure your seatbelts are buckled. Well, at that point, all the food trays were still out. I did not know that we had an intermediate stop. I just knew I was going to Denver, so I was taking my time and enjoying what I was doing. So once I realized we were going to be landing and I had all the food service trays out, I took off my heels and barefoot ran from one end of the cabin to the other, piling trays like this. Couldn't take time to put them in the carriers, just literally threw them in the galley. Ran back, got more, threw them in the galley. And by the time we landed, I was sitting in the floor of the galley with food trays all around me. So from that point on, I learned that I needed to understand not only my destination, but any intermediate stops.
Your first flight, you learned a lot.
I did, and I loved it. And I'm really glad that my supervisor didn't ever hear that story. Melba English, I don't know if Melba's still with us, but if she is, she probably would have been horrified.
And she may have done the same exact thing herself. Who knows?
You don't have options when you're in that situation, and it was much easier without my heels.
Did any of the passengers comment on you being barefoot?
We all laughed at the end.
I love that.
Yes.
What a great story. So starting out from a DC-3 all the way to the other end of the spectrum, did you ever work on or fly in a 747?
No, the 747 was coming online about the time that I left. And so the training was beginning at that time for the 747, but I wasn't trained on that one. I did fly the 707 and the 720, and I flew the Electra as well, and the Electra was my favorite aircraft of the ones I flew. And there was a lounge in the back, and that way we could, when we had finished our work, we could sit and visit with passengers. And so that was just a little extra treat.
How many flight attendants were there on an Electra?
On an Electra, I honestly don't remember. It may have only been 2, but it could have been 4.
So it was, you had backup, and you had more people to help.
Yes,
for sure.
Yes,
yeah, I love the fact that there was a lounge in the back, and you're still having to help serve and make sure they're taken care of, but more informal.
Well, there was a process, that everyone had to be served and everything had to be done before we could. I mean, the passengers, of course, could use the lounge, but we couldn't. We didn't until we had everyone taken care of.
That's great. During your times on these varying different models and different times, in those couple of years, do you remember any of the members of management that flew with you, or any other colleagues that you ran across? Just like you're doing your flight and you run another hostess that's on her day off, and
well, I never had any management on my flights that I was aware of.
Keyword.
Could have, but not aware. I had one particular hostess that I enjoyed a lot, and she had been in my training class. Her name was Jane Pickett, and she was just lots of fun to fly with and layover with. I was so junior during the time that I flew. I always had layovers, unless I had all-nighters. And then sometimes I had one particular route, and we would go out from Dallas to Houston like 8 o'clock at night, and then back to Dallas, and then we would pick up all of these guys, military, and go to Denver. Then we would come back from Denver to Dallas, and then by then it's getting to be morning. We would go to Houston, and then we would come back to Dallas and serve breakfast after being up all night. That was a very difficult trip.
It sounds like it.
It was bad, but one thing I do want to say about those trips that I remember vividly, the military passengers that we had were the most respectful, wonderful young men, and they were mostly men at that time, but they were just so respectful. And so many other flights, people would say, "Can I have this? Can I have that?" And of course we're there to serve them, so certainly it's fine for them to do that. But on these flights, the military passengers never asked for anything, and they were so gracious and appreciative of anything we did for them.
Oh, that's a nice memory. Braniff has a good history with military service as well. So, switching gears a little bit, and being part of Braniff at such a pivotal time in its history, were there any of the ad campaigns or any of the advertising that you remember vividly?
Well, of course. The end of the plane is always going to be a part of me. Because, we were, I think, plain in those cute little Nardis of Dallas suits. And we went, to where we were looking like some kind of wild models or something. And we stalked through the airport like we owned it. And so it was, yes, the end of the plane for sure.
That's a classic one. You were also telling us earlier about doing some modeling in your uniforms for for some of the executive committee.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Well, I'm not sure that I even knew what we were doing, to tell the truth, but I do know that we were modeling South American attire, like legitimate South American attire, and For myself, I was assigned one of these outfits from Peru. Should have brought my picture to show you. Got this big hat and I think some kind of serape looking scarf. It was legitimate Peru. But all of the South American countries, I think, were represented in that particular campaign. And one of my friends that I had gone to hostess school with, she was with Ecuador, so she had the flamboyant skirt, and so that was just kind of a little side gig, I guess. But we enjoyed doing that.
Well, it's nice that you got to branch out from just doing service. That you got to be part of more of the corporate side
Yes.
of things as well.
Yes.
When you were flying, did you find yourself being assigned more to, economy section, or were you rotating between economy and first, or did you work first more?
Well, of course, I was junior, so that means probably not as often in first class. The thing about the 111 is there were only two hostesses on the 111, so that was the same as first class. But most of the time, coach, just because of my junior status.
Hey, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense. When you were ever working in first class, did you ever see any of the senior management, perhaps even the Lawrences?
I didn't. But one thing I remember about first class that I really loved is the little towels, the little warm towels that fragrance. I can still remember that fragrance. It was lemony and fresh. So I was thinking about that today when I was thinking about this interview. I was thinking about, what about first class? How was that? And it was those little hot towels that we served before the meal.
Do you remember how they were? Did you have to make them, like pour the hot water on them?
And they were rolled up on a tray and provided to us in that manner. And then we would pour the hot water over them, and then we had tongs, and we would deliver them to the passengers.
Was there like an oil that you dry
No.
for the lemony smell, or was
No,
it actual lemons?
I think it was already in the towelettes. I think it was they had already treated these towels, and we just put the water over. Mm-hmm.
That's very cool. That's a cool memory. I've never thought about how that actually happens.
Well, I don't know why I remember.
Because they're a treat now.
Yes, I haven't seen one lately.
I haven't been to a restaurant to have one lately. Braniff had a lot of impact on you personally, a lot of impact on the industry, a lot of impact on Dallas-Fort Worth area. So when May 12th, 82 came around, do you have a memory of where you were that day and your thoughts?
That day, I think I was a mother raising two little children, and my life had taken a completely different turn at that time. But we attended church regularly, and we had a very good friend who was a pilot for Braniff, and Henry Tier was his name. And it was devastating to him and to his family. And I don't remember that particular day, but I remember the very next day, one of my really good friends who had a child who wasn't yet in school, as I had a son who was not yet in school, and she called me and she said, "Do you want to go to the airport and let the boys see all of the airplanes parked?" So we did that, and we rode the tram, and we went around and took pictures, and I think I may have picked up one of the last schedules that was available at that time. But it was sad, and it was sad for me to see how it impacted the Tier family. But he did come back. When the airline came back, he came back. He was die-hard Braniff.
Do you happen to know or have memory of where your personal photos of that day are that you took?
Yes, I do.
Oh, good. I'd love to see those.
Well, I'm not,
because we're all familiar with the overhead, shot from the news of all the planes parked, but you were looking at it from a completely different, angle.
Well, I think probably, the photos are old, and so they're probably faded, and I'm not sure what I can put my hands on, or if I still have the ones of all the airplanes, I can look. But I know for sure I have a picture of my child holding that schedule. But I mean, that's not as valuable probably as the photograph of the airplanes for someone else, but for me, that's priceless.
Well, personally, I'd love to see it too.
Okay.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Sure.
So, are there any final memories or anything else you'd like to share about your time at Braniff and your memories of Braniff?
My memories of Braniff are probably some of my favorite memories of my adult life, because I was young and impressionable, and it was the first time I really realized that I could do something on my own, like completely independent of my family. My parents were very proud of me. I remember my dad at my graduation dinner reminding my supervisor, Melba English, who was sitting at our table, that the Braniff stock was going up since I went to work there. That was very embarrassing because I know that I had nothing to do with that, but my daddy was really proud of me. So that's something I'll never forget. And then the other thing that I would like to mention before we wrap it up is just how thankful I am for Richard Benjamin Cass and Collin Ice for all their hard work in keeping the Braniff memories alive, and just collecting an amazing bank of memories for future generations. It's just the best. Thank you so much.
That's very kind. Thank you very much for all that you've been doing and supporting us from the very, very beginning.
I believe in you.
I ran across the photo today, actually it popped up on this iPad, of the photo shoot that we did with the ladies that you helped us.
Oh. And
there you were, in the very first picture from that day, assisting and making sure that memory got recaptured as well. So I this has been very successful. Do you have anything?
No, I can't really think of anything. What about on your training being, was there any of the makeup standards, grooming standards that